Welcome to Property Law 101. I'm Sara Bronin, and I created the series to help you understand the basics of property law. The series covers 4 fundamental questions about property and property law, and today we are talking about the 3rd question, which is using property. In other videos, we cover what zoning is and what it does, and we cover the various ways that zoning codes might offer flexibility to governments and to property owners. In this video, we cover very broadly the pros and cons of zoning as it exists in the scheme as we've described it. So let's start with the good. And again, this is very broad brush. So what might we like about zoning as it exists today? It certainly accomplishes the objectives of increasing light and air, of separating noxious uses from regular uses. Zoning is also predictable. There's a sense of certainty that people pay for. It can be objective. It outlines specific rules. And zoning is better than the alternative, particularly the nuisance alternative, as we discuss in another video. But there are also significant issues with zoning. For one, it segregates uses from each other in ways that have proven to be deeply problematic. And actually, as you go back to the roots of many zoning codes, they were written to achieve racial segregation explicitly written into zoning codes. That changed with the 1917 decision of Buchanan versus Worley, where the US Supreme Court outlawed racially restrictive zoning. But many communities figured out ways to achieve the same goals without using race explicitly in their zoning codes. As it has been applied, zoning codes have been challenged on many grounds. So landowners seeking variances can say that there wasn't enough process, that there wasn't enough due process. Of course, a protected constitutional right. Neighbors might argue that a zoning board didn't make the right decision substantively, perhaps using substantive due process arguments. Prospective residents can sue if they think their constitutional rights might be violated, a concept that we talk about when we discuss exclusionary zoning in another video. Another criticism of zoning is that it is really sometimes very difficult to understand how zoning codes really work. We understand, or we use zoning rather, to make predictions about how people will want to live. We're not always right. In an article I've posted to SSRN about Connecticut's zoning districts, I illustrate how the housing stock in Connecticut, a highly segregated state, by the way, is primarily single-family zoning on large lots. 80% of primarily residential land is zoned for lots of basically an acre, 0.92 acres or more. Zoning locks in a result that ignores demographics, that ignores market changes and demographic changes, because today we see many people who don't want to live that way. There's also connection between zoning and housing prices. The most overregulated cities when it comes to zoning are Boston, New York, and San Francisco. These are places that are very expensive. And probably they're so expensive because wealthy people will pay to be sure about how their communities will develop. In the Connecticut study, some of the most exclusive towns in Connecticut have the longest zoning codes. One clocks in at 500 pages. My hometown of Houston is an interesting counterexample. It has no zoning, and housing there in most years has been deemed to be more affordable than most other cities. On the other hand, much of Houston is unfortunately sprawl, which has terrible environmental consequences and is essentially inequitable because it forces people to rely on cars. There is a voluminous literature about zoning's many effects. For the most part, and I've just highlighted a few here, these effects are judged to be problematic. But despite those studies and despite what I've found in my own research on Connecticut, I tend to be a lot more optimistic about what zoning has the potential to do. But I think the only way we can unlock that potential is if people understand zoning's great power. So I will leave it there. I'd love to hear from you, whether on Twitter or through my website, where you can sign up to my mailing list. And I will see you next time. Thanks.